Today's guest is the CEO of the company known as Employer Branding Australia. I'd like to welcome Mr. Mark Puncher to the podcast. How are you, Mark?
I'm very well, thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mark, it's great to have you, mate. I know you're busy, so I do appreciate your time. I will start where I've started with every other one of these podcasts, asking you, in what industry was your first, let's say, formal leadership role, mate?
Yeah, really good question. I think there's going to be a theme to a lot of my conversation today, but I think there are sort of fixed ideas on what a leader role is, what a manager role is, and actually they're often blurred. My first management role or role where I had people under me was actually when I moved to Melbourne, and I worked for a student recruitment business called Hobson's, and I took on the management of that team, and by default that became a leadership role in terms of the work I was doing, how I was impacting the people that I managed and that I led, and then I was promoted and became the sales director for a period working for that same business. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a blur there around manager versus leader, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, today.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. So when you took that role on in Melbourne, was the industry that you'd had your most experience in, was that the recruitment sector?
Yeah, it was essentially helping universities and higher education institutions and colleges to attract and recruit students. And we had a little team that was there to promote the business and market the business, but also to drive a lot of the candidate marketing, advertising campaigns and marketing campaigns for our clients.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So look, that's a very nice segue into the next question. Do you see from your experience a difference between the leadership function and management function?
So I do see a huge difference. I see a huge difference between leadership qualities and leadership actions and management actions and so on. But I'm not sure it's often classified all that correctly by a lot of the people that are out there, a lot of the noise and the voices on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Sure. I'm certainly a more instinctive, probably more effective leader than I'm a manager. And that speaks as much to my qualities as my flaws and my failures. I think there are some myths. One assumption that is always out there is there's this deep sort of held belief that leaders are somehow more important, more senior, more valuable than managers. Now, of course, if you look at leadership and you look at definitions of leadership or managers or managerial skills in certain ways, you might say, yep, so they tend to be more senior, they tend to be paid more, they tend to have more levels of responsibility. But quite often, it's not as simple as saying, well, you've got the manager who reports to the leader. I think you need both of those types of people, you need both of those functions, and both bring very, very different skill sets, qualities and perspectives that you have to work at. So I think that's one thing. The other one that I see all the time is there's this idea of the manager, the good manager being earnest, diligent, doer, someone who gets on and can do the detail but can't really think big picture. And I think that's nonsense. And I also think that the idea of the leadership who's big picture, and basically we forgive ourselves as leaders saying, well, we don't really do detail. Well, I think that's nonsense too. What I've found is that both for managers and leaders, you need a high level of empathy and integrity, and you need serious skills.
Wow. Okay, and that's quite a different distinction to what's been made by the previous podcast guests. And you've hit on something that does exist in the research literature, at least from the stuff that I've been able to glean, is that managers aren't just confined to the management function, and to assume you can't have a manager or senior management or management at any level that can think beyond their role to the strategic and looking to the future is probably a nonsense, because that's not how the real world works. And how much would you agree with the following, that those in managerial roles are in effect looking to become formalized leaders in the future, so they are an active source of good ideas and push forward for the organization if they're developed in that way?
So you're saying that managers can become leaders if they're developed in that way? Sorry, is that what you mean?
Yeah, and that people in effect sometimes want managerial positions as a stepping stone to becoming a formal leader and being able to take the reins of a team, of an organization, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think in so many areas, leadership manager, it's just, these are just another example of it. In so many areas, we're creating these very odd, rigid structures in people's expectations and ideas. You know, this idea of people wanting to have manager in their title because they feel they should have manager in their title rather than because they understand what it means. And then the same with leader. You know, people getting obsessed with the job title, people getting obsessed with the idea of, I feel that I need to move to the next level. You know, one of the other assumptions that or myths that I think is out there is this idea that all leaders are visionaries, and that, you know, they're this amazing, attainable, these superheroes, whereas managers are just the people who
Yeah.
you know, I've heard so much terminology around this. People talk about managers and, you know, mother hen. You know, it's a hugely discriminative thing. Talk about, you know, often this idea of male leader, big picture, making the decisions, and female manager looking after the chooks. You know, and just awful. And I think that so I think what we're doing is we're creating an idea, if we're not careful, whether it's about gender or anything else. You know, we're creating this idea that you're a manager now, but if you keep working, and if you can become a bit more of an extrovert, then you could be a leader, which is absolute nonsense on every level. So I think it's great if people want to be leaders. I think it's great if people want to be managers, but we need to get much more emphatic about the impact that great managers have. We also need to realize that some people, their future is in incredible, hopefully high-paid, successful management, and others, I mean, I classify myself, I love managers because I'm really not that great a manager myself, in terms of some of the functions that where it's been required of me. So I think, you know, you can have great careers in both, but my concern is that too many organizations, it's sort of, well, if you don't make it past manager, you weren't successful. Or you know, if you don't make it, you know, good for you, but you're still not going to earn the big bucks until you're a leader.
That's the yardstick. Okay, now I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. Look, and that I can confess to this as a younger man, because I say this on the podcast, being in my mid-40s, I'm now heading down the track of middle age, which is scary as all hell. But I guess in my younger days, so my early 20s and early 30s, yeah, chasing that position and that title meant exactly what you're talking about. And I think it was part what you put in your own head, and no one can control that. But it's also, I think, the way organizations are structured and how you deal with that, mate. That's another series of podcasts we could talk about, because that's quite a significant area, because it also impacts on what's available in terms of development for people at different levels in organizations, and some of it being predicated on, well, if you're a CEO or a senior person on a board, you get this type of training. If you're not, you get this type of training. And
that's right. You're sending people down very, very specific trajectories. What if just for a moment we ditched the term manager and the term leader? You know, what if we forgot about those things and actually started about what does a role require? I'll give you an example. I used to run a very large marketing team and events function in the UK for the Guardian News and Media on the commercial side. And there's no doubt that I ran it, and I had someone who was sort of my 2IC, and there's no doubt it's quite a traditional thing where I was the leader, if you like, and she was the manager, in terms of she was looking after more of the people. She was most importantly in the detail of the execution operations day to day. But that didn't mean that I was a visionary wandering around, you know, just shoulder and with 3 words inspiring them for the rest of their life, you know, and it certainly didn't mean that I didn't need to be in the hard stuff. So I think, you know, from my point of view, the only thing that wasn't traditional about that is we didn't really think of it as leader and manager. We thought about it, frankly, as saying, look, I'm really good at synthesizing this strategy, at sending clear, consistent messaging, at, you know, supporting the overall progression of this team and this division and what we're doing. And yes, doing a lot of the stakeholder liaison at the senior level. And what she was great at was all the rest, the operations, the execution. There's another one. You say operations, you immediately think inferior. You think, oh yeah, you do the detail and you do the admin. Yep. You know, it's just nonsense. It's just very, very different skill sets.
Yeah, no, I would very much agree with that. Look, we could talk about this for multiple podcasts, and it's something I might hold you to down the track, mate. But look, the next area, and this is of interest to me, and I've had some very interesting responses to this question, is, look, we all make mistakes. And so from your experience in the roles that you've had, not just the current one, but any of your roles that you've had, how do you engage with an error or mistake that's attributed to you, mate?
Own it. Absolutely own it. own it with a smile, put neon lights all over you. You know, first, the biggest impact, not the one you're thinking about when this stuff happens, the biggest impact is your people see that you are human and that you make mistakes, and that if they see you as successful and someone they respect, great that they saw you make a mistake, because the worst thing we're doing to people in this space is making them feel that perfection is needed at every level and every moment. What I try and do is obviously understand it. So I'll own it straight up. I'll understand it and what's going on. So that means some self-reflection and sometimes some analysis, depending on the nature of the error. I will ask people I trust, including people within my own team. I'll listen and I'll hear what they're saying. And then, you know, again, own it again, and then show the changes that you're making as a result, whether it's things you did or something else, or something indirect. One point I'd make on that is there is something very, very powerful about an owner, about a leader, such as we call them, owning a result that happened underneath them, if you like. And I don't mean just I take the blame and because everybody will think I'm a great guy for it. That's not what it's about. It's about saying, look, I lead this team, and if something didn't happen, even if I didn't touch it, if it's within this team, if I consider it's a result of whether it's a policy or a cultural thing that's going on in the team or something that I've failed to really help cater for, then I'm going to own that, you know. And a lot of people talk nowadays increasingly, and I love this, about, you know, leaders, again, such as they are, our job is to create the right environment where people can thrive. And if you haven't done that, you know, you can think you've done a great job and done lots of nice things, but if something happens, often those failures or those problems can make you see, yeah, I missed that. I didn't get that right. What a great thing. What a great moment, you know, for you to learn and for other people to see that you're learning.
Yeah, and that's your. Tell me if I get this right. That what you're talking about there is not only owning, taking responsibility for a mistake or an error, but then learning from it and using it as an opportunity to do better into the future. Is that where you're coming from?
100%. And it sends a message. You know, we've all been there. I worked with somebody a few years ago that he wasn't a leader, but he wanted to be. And every time something went wrong, he had things that went wrong that were clearly his responsibility, and he would sort of immediately say, well, obviously there's no way I could have got that right when this was happening. He'd be pointing at other people, he'd be pointing at others, he'd basically defending himself. And what you could see there was, you know, the opposite of that resilience and self-assurance and comfort and self-comfort and self-awareness that you need to be a great people leader, to be a great people manager as well.
Yeah, I think though, one of the things that, and you touch on this, I think, quite strongly, and others have as well, is that it sometimes is a really big threat to the ego to put your hand and say, I stuffed this up. And depending on the nature of the mistake or the error, that can have different consequences for you reputationally, whether it's perceived or real, that it can be quite confronting. And it is refreshing to hear that most, if not, I would not say most, all of the podcast people that I've spoken to, as well as amongst the emerging leaders, is this idea that you own it and analyze it and then take it to the next level and try and turn the negative into a positive where you can, and then sort of move forward from there. Look,
yeah. Sorry, one more thing on that. I think, you know, if there's one thing I've learned about people and negative behaviours over the years, it's that when someone behaves badly, they're usually hurting. And so, you know, some of the best leaders that you'll work with are leading well at that moment because they're in a good place and they're comfortable with themselves and they're self-assured. So when you feel fine and when you feel okay, and you know, if you're playing a sport and you're a great player and you make a mistake, you'll put your hand up. You see it. They'll put their hand up and they'll go, yeah, that was me, because they know they're good. Yeah. And they know that was okay, you know, and I'll probably make another mistake, but I'll also do loads of good stuff. The people that really struggle with it are the ones that deep down feel like they're failures. They're worried about how it's going to see. If you stuff up, people are going to know it anyway, whether you admit it or not. So if the moment you start folding your arms and saying, well, no, it wasn't me, it was because of all these things, you're not changing the narrative. You're just actually reinforcing an idea that perhaps you're not the person to oversee that project or that team.
Yeah, man, I could not agree more. Okay, look, the next, and this is a nice sort of segue into the next question. What have you found is the most difficult part about being a leader, Mark?
Oh, all of it.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, that's the end of the show, everyone. Thanks for listening in. And All right.
Look,
So
love leading, and for me
yeah,
personally, leading means empowering people. Genuinely, people say stuff all the time, but I really mean it. I think the hardest thing is managing yourself. By default, the way leadership is in a lot of organizations, in most places, is you've gone up to a certain level. I've found that often, unfortunately, the quality of your managers tends to diminish as you get more senior in an organization, and the time they spend with you and the how they can impact you. Unfortunately, I've had some great exceptions, but I think either way, whether you work for yourself, I mean, I run my own business now, but it's managing yourself and maintaining a personal balance. You know, and I don't just mean work-life balance and all the rest of it. I actually mean managing when things are really tricky, whether it's because they're really busy or really tough, or you fail or something goes wrong. There's nowhere to go with that. There's often, you know, particularly if you're on your own thing. But so it's how do you fly through the middle of the wonderful triumphs and the challenges as well, and really and still go to sleep at night, you know, and still feel I can sleep, I can rest, and then I can come back again tomorrow and do this again.
yeah. Look, and this is just a little bit of unpacking of some of that, because being someone who's running their own business, do you think the pressures of leadership and also being entrepreneurial in that sense differ to if you were working for somebody else in a corporate or non-profit environment, but that is not yours, so to speak, that it's not, you don't have as much skin in the game as someone who's actually an owner?
Yeah, no. So I'm going to disagree. I think needless to say that you know, if it's your own thing and it's your own livelihood and so on, yeah, of course there's an element. But the biggest thing for me, and it's funny, it was only when I went into business myself, I reflected back on my career and realised there were all salaried, you know, all these salaried roles that I'd had. There were moments when I was, you know, highly accountable, you know, so much skin in the game, and others where I wasn't. And it was about how connected I was to the employer I was working with. And
Gotcha.
how much I bought into what they were trying to do. The reality is that in this day and age, we're all kind of guns for hire when we're employed by people, whatever our level. And but I think it's, you know, the secret to employers and organizations who want to really connect with their people, leaders or managers or otherwise, is to show that purpose, to really ensure that people are bought into that and inspired and feel part of that and know what their contribution is and that they feel valued for that. Because when you can get that right, there's skin in the game by default, you know?
Yeah, no, I understand that, and that's very consistent with some of the other podcast guests that I've had on entrepreneurial past or while running their businesses at the time that I interviewed them. They pretty much said the same thing, mate. So, okay, something more positive here. How do you measure success as a leader, mate?
This is going to sound really cheesy.
Right, go for it. It's all right. No right or wrong answers here.
Most cliches are cliches because they've been said a lot, and that means there's no value. For me, it's got to be the achievements of my team and my people. I think about their achievements as individuals and their achievements as a collective, and I absolutely take a very broad brush when I talk about achievements. It could be achievements at home as much as at work, and I genuinely believe, obviously, you've got to, you know, not interfere and not intrude and so on, but I believe that I can help impact how they feel as individuals, and that impacts way beyond their performance at work. And that sort of links to, I suppose, I care about their achievements and their progress, but I also care about how they feel. And I find that, frankly, if they're achieving, they're probably feeling pretty good. And if they're feeling well, they're probably achieving. So it's hand in hand. But for me, that's the measurement. And it sounds a bit, you know, again, overdone, but great leaders, and I've seen this before, leaders who their team gets something and wins something or achieves something, breaks a record in sales or whatever, and the leader, suddenly it's all about the leader. And you think, what's going on here? Why is the leader feeling the need to do that? You know, great leaders and consistent leaders who succeed are those who genuinely see the challenge as theirs, alongside their team, and see the success as their teams rather than their own.
Yeah, no, that's a very it's not a one-off view, mate. I think it's come through in a lot of it comes through in the literature, and it also does come through in people you might talk to. And again, we all have different networks of people, and I've seen exactly what you're talking about played out in the profit and not-for-profit sector, and I've also seen it played out where you'd think the person who's taking the credit did absolutely everything on behalf of 20 or 30 people, and it's not the case. But that's you know, that speaks, I think, more to the individual than anything else, and maybe has nothing to do with leadership, but more about where your headspace is at, and that differs for all of us. So look, let's move on here to some statements I've got, and again, I'm looking forward to your views on this. The first one: on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
I think it can help. It can really help. I don't think let's be clear, it's not about I've done this specific job, so now I can lead the team that's doing it. I think that can help as well, but it's not necessary. I think having been there and done it, whether in the direct space or elsewhere, it's very good for true empathy with people on the tools. So if you've been there and done it, but I certainly think actually stepping up from a team to lead that same team, that's actually a really challenging thing to do. Obviously culturally, your workmates become the people who work for you and so on. And how do you do that? It can be done, but it's hard. But I certainly, like all of these things, it can really help, but I don't think it should become a stick that we beat people with. Well, she hasn't worked in this industry before, how can she lead? Well, that's nonsense. It's what are the fresh perspectives she brings? What are the skills and transferable skills and experience that she brings to the role?
Yeah, brilliant. Next statement: formal education helps to develop better leaders.
Well, I think it works for some and not for others. I think, again, the idea that a great leader always has formal education is nonsense. It's about time we turn these statements on their head. That said, it can add huge value. So for me, I studied at university, I studied modern languages and management, and I learned a heck of a lot more from the French literature and Spanish literature that I studied than I did from management. And I've applied for my own career, strangely. My time at university helped me learn to think and reflect at a much deeper level, and to communicate at a significantly more advanced level. And I think, so from that perspective, I place high value on my university degree. But the idea of, it's a marketing leadership job. Has this person done a specific marketing degree? I think that's nonsense, especially in this day and age. Incidentally, as an aside, one big part of the education, the experience that I took from my university degree was I actually studied 300 miles away from where my family lived, where my parents lived. And I think we're losing something. The more it becomes a kind of live at home and go to university and sort of progress through, and employability is very important, and getting that degree and progressing through quickly is important. But I think there was something wonderful about being able to go away from home, for me at 18, and grow and become the person you want to be and learn about yourself. I think that the experience of going to university, and for me being away from home, helped me become a better leader. It helped me learn about myself. It helped me learn about others. Not just the overall independence thing, but actually just the nature of it. And, we mentioned literature. For me, reading amazing literature from England and English language, also French and Spanish literature and South American literature. There's so much in that can teach you about the way people think, the way people behave. In lots of ways, more than a 3-hour lecture on consumer culture or on people management.
Look, this last one, I think you're going to have a very different view than my other guests, but I'm looking forward to hearing it. Leaders are born, not made.
Ooh, I think that's a really dangerous either or. I think that.
Okay. Yeah.
Stereotype. We have this I started the conversation today with the same thing. There are huge stereotypes out there of what leadership is, and connotations when you say leader or manager. And one of them is this idea of, he's a manager, but obviously he's never going to make a leader. And that's so poor. It's damaging to the individual. It's also damaging to the employers. And so I think the idea, this idea of leaders are born, not made, means we're basically saying leaders are very, very special people and untouchable, and you're either there or you're not. I disagree entirely. So I think what I've learned is that great leaders and managers are vital in actually unearthing leadership potential in their people. So I believe that leadership is unearthed, and I think it is nurtured and shaped. You might have some great, I've seen the research, of course, you could have characteristics and so on that are leadership oriented. But I've seen many people who have those characteristics who have not become great leaders. In fact, they've become terrible leaders, and there's probably a little more damaging than that to people's lives than terrible leaders. And in the same way, I've seen great leaders, or I've seen people who might not instinctively be seen as leaders in the in the cliched sense or in the classical sense, I've seen them become great people leaders. They might not be visionaries. They might not even be big picture people, but they may be incredible at sitting behind a team, setting the expectation, and then, supporting and empowering this team to progress through letting them sort of be themselves and do their thing. I've seen that done before from people who personality-wise are not typical, leadership candidates.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that is a slightly different view to what I've had in previous podcasts for myself.
So what do they say, Eric?
Look, the majority, I think, you can make by a small margin that you can make someone, you can develop someone through time into being a leader. What's not clear yet, and I think it's because I just haven't had the number of people coming through to build some certainty around this. I think experience is one of these key experience and time, and those things to me are intricately linked in that. I think I became a better leader in my industry. I'm not saying I'm the best, but I think I've done well for myself where I am because I've had 10 years and I've been in the industry for 10 years, not in the same role, but I worked my way up and I've been learning every year that I've been in this job because of the nature and complexity of what my industry is, which is the commercial seafood sector. And I could do this till I retire and I still would not know every nuance of my industry. And that to me is an experiential thing. And over time, you'll get better at what you do. That's not necessarily the case, or nor do you get that luxury in some industries and in some aspects of life. So the example I think that stands out in my mind is good political leadership. So you'll see someone, let's say a state premier, and I won't say Queensland, but let's say a fictitious state, that person's been there for a while and they're a perceived lackluster leader, and then there's an emergency event and they suddenly are there at the forefront getting things done and being seen to take care of the issue. That to me is sometimes always going to be those caveats to bringing out good leadership in people. Sometimes the situation just demands for people to step up, and when those people step up, I think it's an open invitation to be the best kind of leader that you can be.
That's so interesting, and actually it opens it up completely. I mean, Churchill is renowned for being a great prime minister for war, but a terrible prime minister for peace.
Yes,
for business as usual. And maybe that's a nice reminder of this idea of, well, maybe the problem is having one word, leader or prime minister, or whatever we want to, or premier, whatever we want to call it. Maybe it's actually, well, again, what skills do we need? What qualities do we need? What behaviors do we need at this time? There's loads of research out there about organizations and CEOs saying you literally might rotate between type A and type B CEOs. And that will be right, to have this CEO that helps you transform and take it to the next level, and then move to that CEO who can sort of just keep the things going and consolidate and back it up. Because one thing I've learned, it's very hard to be both of those people.
Mate, you might have just discovered another area of literature for research in that. This idea that you just brought up, that cooperative leadership model, where and I've not seen this, so please give me an example if there is one, but I don't see many organizations where you've got one or two or even three people that are equivalently tasked with saying, you guys or girls are the brains trust, and we want a leadership dynamic coming from that group. Where what if an organization did have a type A and type B leader, and it's between those two people that why is it always on the shoulders of one particular person? So when you're talking about models of leadership, mate, that's a massive area of interest. And look, I've said this in previous podcasts. If globally we're spending, I think it's over 300 billion in leadership development and developing people in leadership roles, then obviously this area is of significance to all sectors of the economy, whether you're profit or not for profit. And continually asking and asking questions of the models by which we live, I think, is important.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly don't have any examples of where that's happening. I'd love to. I think there are examples where you've got very strong, embedded, connected leadership teams where behind the scenes that's happening, or to some degree.
Yep.
But what I have seen reasonably consistently is this: if you look at CEO appointments across organizations, especially some of the bigger companies, it's very common. It's a bit like politics, isn't it? If you have a CEO who is a certain way and very extreme on one side of things, maybe you have someone who's very, very not really about the detail, very ambassadorial, very client-facing or market-facing, that sort of person. Then quite often the person who follows that person, that first CEO, will be the opposite. will be the detailed thinker, the methodical, the realist. So I think and I don't think that's just as simple as a company just lurching to the opposite, because they don't like what they're losing. But I think organizational needs change, and I think cultural needs change, and it would be very interesting to see a model of what the sort of thing you're talking about. Could it work where you have two people who are jointly running this thing?
Yeah, and that's again, mate. There's about 3 or 4 different podcasts we could do out of this.
And I'm not your guy for that. I don't know the answer, to be honest.
Yeah, and neither do I. But again, it's worth just bringing these things up for discussion. So look, the next statement is around some of the research that I'm doing to get my PhD in leadership development done, and I'm looking at some core leadership capabilities, particularly in the agriculture sector. So it is sector specific, and like I've said before, if I looked at all capabilities that are out there, I don't think I'd ever get my piece of work done. So I've had to delimit what I'm doing. So I'm looking at strategic thinking and foresight as being some of the most critical leader capabilities in that sector. So what my question has been in the past and will be to you now is not so much whether you agree or disagree with me or it's not that kind of question. It's more, what are your views on those things in the context of leadership capabilities overall?
Yeah, interesting. Mine is, I'm not an academic in this space. I don't have the research integrity that I would need to answer confidently. But my opinion is that they're really important things. They're really valuable things in future leaders. But for me, the most important things you need are empathy and integrity.
Yep.
And naturally, they are people-focused things, or I see them as human and people-focused things, more so than strategic and foresight. I think that the way that data and tech and the way everything's changed, things are different. So okay, let's take agriculture. The data is there, the thinking is there, the trends are there. Should a CEO be actually spending all her or his time trying to predict the future in this day and age? I'm not convinced. Again, very simplistic view, because I'm not an expert in ag or in this stuff. But I think what is really important is that person can actually see all the data that's out there. They can see the trends, that they have the awareness and the ability and the self-assurance to take on board new stuff, to recognize that maybe what we're doing isn't the right thing for tomorrow, or maybe we should check that. But the key for me is, unless it's a business full of robots, is can you pass on your vision and your plan and pass on your goals and your energy for what you're trying to achieve to a workforce of human beings? Can you relate to their day-to-day lives and intersect that with what you're trying to achieve, and essentially get the best out of those people? If you don't have empathy and if you don't have integrity, you're going to struggle. Look,
the last question, and this is one, again, because you sound like you're around my age bracket, so I can ask this.
I'm 40.
Okay.
Well, and I'm owning it.
There you go. So you're younger than me. But yeah, I'm 44. All right. So the last question is, what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Chill out. Stop worrying so much.
Right.
I'd say, what I'd say, and I look back now, I'd say grab the challenging and even sometimes negative feedback that you get from people who actually care about you, and use it, embrace it. I look back now, and it's very easy in this day and age to sail on through and have people not really challenge you and not really tell you where you should be. I'm quite a confident person, and but there were moments in my career where a particularly strong manager or leader, and sometimes a strong colleague, took me aside and told me something that wasn't easy to hear. And those things are what shaped who I am today, and my ability to embrace those really helped. I think I did that successfully, more or less, but I would say go and seek out more of that. Go and listen and hear people. Because you don't need to have all the answers yourself, and because actually the people who invest in you enough to challenge you will help you become a better person.
And on that extremely positive note, I'd like to thank you, Mark. So for the listeners, that was Mark Puncher, the CEO and founder of Employer Branding Australia. Do I have that right, Mark?
You certainly do. Thanks a lot, Eric, for your time.
No worries, mate. And for those listening, thank you again. Always appreciate your time in joining us on Talking Leadership, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.